When you decide to implement blob storage in Windows Azure, you have the two choices for your security settings. You can make private blob storage, wherein you have to have the appropriate management keys to be able to gain access to the content, or you can use public blobs, wherein, in fact, anyone is able to get to the content. And obviously, you might use whichever one suits your needs. So we already have the private one, and in this example here, we are going to set up a public blob so that we can make sure that anybody with the URL can be able to gain access to the content of the blobs. So again, in your Windows Azure portal, you can still create the containers for the blobs. So this one was already created as a private one, and we can go ahead and we can hit add, and we can create a public one. And again, for the access you see here, instead of private, we're going to go ahead and choose public. And again, you have the choice for the entire container or for just this particular blob. In this case, for a simple example, we'll just go with a single public blob. If you do go with the container, then it gives users the ability to list the contents of the blob, and they can pick and choose whichever one is required. But we'll just go with a public blob here. And again, they can be created within the Azure portal, but there's virtually no configuration that you can do. Again, you see that we've got no blobs, and there's really no option to upload anything from within here. So again, we're going to use our Storage Explorer. And if we just go ahead and refresh this, we should see the new container has been created. And note that this one does not have the padlock indicating that it's public. And in fact, if we double click on this, we'll create the blob first, and then we'll see the security settings that are there by default. So the first thing we need to do, of course, is to upload a file into the blob. So I'm just going to go with a very simple text file that I have right here. So there's our file, and now that we have this created in the public container, if we double click on this, we'll see that again we do have this URI as available for gaining access to the content. So right from the get-go, all we have to do to see this content is this option here, View in the Browser. And since this one is set to public, this one should come right up, and there it is. That is the content of my file. This is my file. I can close out of there, and I'll go back to the original. There it is right there, and you see there's the exact same content. So that's all you have to do to make any particular file available to the public, is give them that simple URL right there, and that's going to allow them to gain access to that. Now, you do have some options under the security button here to change what the capabilities are. So we'll have a quick look here. If I just hit my security button, you see that it has been set up as a public blob, but there are still permissions that you can assign to that. So right here on the shared access signatures, you do see the blob name, and you can see that there are permissions that we can set. So there's read, write, delete, and list. Now, those are the only 4 permissions that are available, and you can set any kind of combination of those 4. But another option you see here is a policy. This is entirely up to you. Because there's only 4 permissions, it's not a huge deal. But if you go to your shared access policies, what you can do is you can simply define one that has these settings in place. So they become reusable, is basically all that this does. It gives you a little bit of easier access to set whatever permissions you want. So you do have to create a name and just say my Paul, for example, and then you can just say we're going to allow read and write on this particular policy. Now, I'm just going to cancel this for the time being, but one thing to take note of with a policy, if I just go back to the shared access signatures here, any kind of permission set you see that I might apply here, note the start and the expiry time. Okay, this is today's date and particular time, and you see that the expiry time is only an hour later. So any kind of ad hoc signature is what this is known as, is only valid for an hour. Okay, so if you want to set those permissions and have them in place longer than an hour, then here's the quick way to do it. Just copy this format. Okay, go to your shared access policy, leave those in place, and for the start time, just paste that in, and that way you know it's in the correct format. And on the expiry time, Just paste that in again, but this allows you to set pretty much any expiry time well beyond 1 hour. So, for example, we can change the date to an entire year later. And once those are in, we can now save that policy. Container policy has been saved. We can go back to the shared access signature, and then we can specify the policy. Okay, we probably have to close and come back in here, but now that that policy has been created, let's just make sure I save that again. Okay, we'll close out, and let's just go back in. And now we should see that we've got the option to choose My Policy. So that's just how you can create a more persistent policy set of permissions for any kind of public blob file. So let's just do one final test to make sure that this is available now. Again, we can just double click and we can go to the view in the browser, and then we still have access to that content. So again, the public blob does not require having the access keys that you might have to set up for private blobs.